It's the Innovation Stream and I'm here with Matt Morris, Sustainability Lead. And we're going to be discussing how we can design with sustainability at core. Now Matt, sustainability seems to be on everybody's lips at the moment. There's a big consumer appetite for it, which seems to be driving the competitive market towards taking it a bit more seriously.
I think it is having a big effect actually. And I can tell you a story about what's changed in the last maybe 3 to 5 years. So I was working about 10 years ago as an environmental consultant, and we were talking to a large consumer packaged goods company about sustainability, and we were talking to their corporate social responsibility department. The budgets were pretty small, and it was clear that it was a kind of a side accessory to their business. Now at CDP, we're talking to the same company, and we're talking to their product development team and their marketing team, and they're really starting to wrap it into the core of their business because, honestly, for companies like that, it is core to their survival, but also to their growth.
And sustainability seems to be such a huge topic. How do you decide where to focus?
Yeah, that is a challenge that a lot of companies are facing. I mean, at its core, in my view, sustainability is about the long-term prosperity of people, and that's typically broken down into 3 areas. So you've got society, i.e. the societal structures that allow people to prosper, things like health, well-being. Then you've got the economy, which provides people the opportunities they need to access, the things that provide them well-being. And then the environment, which provides services and inputs to both economy and society. So those 3 things are all interdependent. But companies can't tackle all of that at once. It's too big a challenge. And so they like to focus. Typically, they'll use a thing called a materiality assessment to do that. And that's a process where companies can look at where they can have the biggest impact. And they'll usually do that by considering 2 things. First, they'll consider what are the key priorities for their stakeholders, the people that they need to consider when they make decisions. And then second, where can they have the biggest impact? Either because they're doing something now which isn't great, that they can improve, or because there's an opportunity for them to do something even better as part of their day-to-day business. And those are the areas where they need to focus.
And if it's so difficult to help companies to think in the longer term, how do you help them to address sustainability in the shorter term, in the here and now?
I think for a lot of companies, it's a real challenge thinking on the long term. They have a lot of pressures in the short term. So in the short term, you can make detailed design changes to a product or service that don't fundamentally affect what it is, but give you quick gains in sustainability.
Can you give an example for that?
Yeah, so in the world of consumer packaged goods, which is really at the moment at the forefront of sustainability because they're so exposed to consumer pressure, we're seeing an awful lot of strategies like lightweighting, like changing the material to a more sustainable material without fundamentally changing what the packaging is.
So moving away from plastics, for example?
Could be moving away from plastics, or it could be staying within plastics, but switching to a plastic that's more recyclable, more compatible with the circular economy, which is a really big trend at the moment. So there's some short-term measures that they're taking, and you'll have seen this actually in your day-to-day lives. So you'll notice that, for example, a lot of the food, there's a lot less air in the packaging, so they're shrinking the packaging down to the minimum that it can possibly be to hold the product. You'll notice that some of the packaging is probably a lot squashier, perhaps more flimsy feeling than it was before. And actually I've been really impressed by that because I think that maybe 3 years ago consumers wouldn't have accepted that. They'd have said this feels cheap. But now it's viewed as a positive. People are saying, great, this isn't a wasteful amount of plastic.
There's a different expectation from the consumer experience.
It's really evolving. Yeah, I really think it's evolving, and I think that's great because that's going to drive, especially companies that are marketing led, i.e. they pay really careful attention to what consumers think and design to that. Consumers really have power in those areas, and when we look at what people are saying on social media, how they respond to surveys, then there's a lot more predisposition towards things that are sustainable in the eyes of consumers. Companies are reacting to that, and it's just a question of how quickly they can change.
And so, for example, there was a big outcry with the LFTs, the lateral flow test.
People responded to that because they saw and they were physically throwing away. It's a really visceral thing, throwing something away. A piece of plastic that they didn't see much value in. Actually, that plastic is doing a fair bit It's just not so visible to the consumer. The test strip is made of nitrocellulose, quite a fragile material. If it gets compressed, then it stops working as effectively. And the last thing that anyone wants is a lateral flow test that gives the wrong result. That's really bad. That's bad for sustainability as well as for people's health, because if people go to hospitals use an awful lot of energy and resources. So, we need to understand when things are performing a useful function. That said, I do think there's an opportunity to optimize the design of things like lateral flow tests. And so I think we will see a whole host of redesign of optimization, but that's only going to get us so far. And we're going to need another, not just an evolution of the design, but new designs and new ways of delivering things like lateral flow tests to get us to where we need to be in the next decade and beyond.
And going to examples like, for example, an iPhone.
I think consumer electronics is a real new frontier of sustainability. When we talk about packaging, that's a materials problem. I think we're getting to grips with it, and it's a case of scaling up the solutions. For things like electronics, there's still quite a lot of technological work to be done to understand how we're going to make those things sustainable. There's a company called Fairphone that makes a totally modular mobile phone. That idea has been around for ages. There was a prototype from Google several years ago, but Fairphone has really taken this and has spent a lot of effort developing it into a usable product. And that product's getting better and better. As a business, they're doing pretty well. And I think that's a pioneering example of what we could do with electronics, because for that, if the screen breaks on your mobile phone, you can buy a new screen, you can fit it yourself without too much effort. And actually what we've seen as a result perhaps of that success, Apple, for example, has released repair manuals for its phones, which it never did before, so that people can repair Apple phones as well. And I think we'll see a general trend in that direction, designed for repairability.
But do you think there's an argument for companies to start to come together and almost cooperate a little bit more in terms of creating some universal packaging, for example, or a universal system that helps them all have sustainability at the core?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that companies historically, they're very good at competing. That's built into most companies' DNAs, obtain a competitive advantage and protect it in some way. Maybe through patenting or through know-how. Now we're starting to see a slight shift. So some companies are actually starting to make their new technologies or new designs available to their competitors even, in a bid to scale those solutions up. And an example that in an industry we've been working in recently, tubes for the beauty sector or the consumer healthcare sector, so like toothpaste tubes, for example. Generally not recyclable. Usually they're made up of many different materials laminated together. Colgate recently developed a mono-material toothpaste tube. So it's just made of polyethylene, so it can be recycled technically. And that's great. But when you're dealing with a complex system like recycling, unfortunately that's not enough, because there's a whole load of other tubes out there that are not recyclable. It's a game of economics. If it's hard to do, it's expensive to do, it's not worth doing, no one will do it. So what they've done is they've made their design available to everybody. And they've said, we want everybody to use this design, because then we'll get the scale we need to make these tubes recyclable in practice. And that's probably a bit of a new step for most companies, but we're seeing it happening elsewhere as well. And I think that collaboration and a sense of interconnectedness is fundamental to sustainability and designing for sustainability.
Why aren't Colgate just, for example, putting their toothpaste in glass packaging, for example, or something that isn't plastic in the first place?
So yes, we do have these startups bringing in new packaging. On the face of it, they might look more sustainable. I would say it's really important to get objective evidence for that, because things like, comparing glass to plastic, you've got factors like the weight of the material and how easy it is to transport, what happens to it at the end of the life, can it be recycled, can it be reused? All of these things feed into an objective assessment of sustainability, and that's really important to have that evidence. But I think, these large companies, they have an obligation to their shareholders to operate profitably. So they need to see evidence that consumers will, at scale, buy these new products and technologies. There's a couple of ways they can do that. They can pilot and they can gather evidence directly. Or in some industries, we see startups, being bold, bringing on new technologies that maybe are riskier and are more difficult for the larger companies to market themselves. But that provides almost a body of evidence for the whole industry about which direction is likely to be successful. And it's very fast changing at the moment.
So generally speaking, a lot of these businesses are trying to sell their product, and they're trying to get consumers to consume their product at a fairly frequent basis so that they're spending more and more of their money and they're reaping that financial benefit.
Yeah.
But high consumption rates is kind of the antithesis of sustainability, isn't it? So how do you reconcile those two?
Yeah, so what companies need to do is they need to find business models that decouple material consumption from their success. And there are some companies like Unilever that have set an explicit goal on that front. So they want to grow their value as a company, but drop their material consumption. And that's what all companies need to be aiming for. And that's where things like subscription models become useful, because then you're providing a service rather than selling products. The more products you sell, the better your company does. And we're seeing pioneering examples of it popping up in lots of industries, of companies trying to have more of an ongoing relationship with customers rather than selling them something and that being the end of it. And that has a number of benefits. Not only does the company get more opportunities to build loyalty with a customer, which they love to do, but also the product or the service, there are lots of opportunities to make the most of the materials, to repair it, to restore it back to its former glory. And so there's an opportunity for everybody in that type of relationship.
Thanks so much, Matt. That was a really interesting exploration of how we can have sustainability at the core of product design.
Thanks, Hannah. It was great to talk to you.